Excellent. Good morning, all. It is 9:02. I'll call the Work and Lands Enterprise Board meeting to order. First item on the agenda is to approve the meeting minutes from March 17th. So I'll be looking to a motion to approve. Allison Lowe, is that your motion? Excellent. Thank you. Do we have a second? Liz, thank you. Are there any comments, changes, corrections? Not hearing any. All those approved, say yay. Raise your hand. Good ahead. Opposed, nay. All right, the motion carries. We're going to move over to program updates. Elizabeth?
Yeah, good morning, all. I want to begin the updates with a general reminder that the first board symposium is scheduled for June 16th. It should be on everyone's calendars. We're still solidifying the contract process for a location, but it's going to be on June 16th. And the first, I think this update or reminder is also linked to a question. I'm going to share with you a few, I guess I want to say, learning opportunities that I think we are either going to, I think that we're going to try to work into the symposium agenda. So one of those is FPR has asked to offer a state of the state on forestry. They think that there's like so much, there's just a lot going on, and they think it would be good to take a little bit of time to update the board. And I'm sure that the Forest Economy Committee will also be involved in that. So that's one piece of learning that's been requested for the June symposium. I think it's also, so I would say that's the only request that's been made. I think and I think tied to that is, and Ellen, I'll let you speak a little bit more if you want, but the Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund just completed, or not just, but completed a few months ago the final report on their assessment around service provision needs, the needs assessment for the forest sector. Christine McGowan, who's the program director, the forest program director, is going to be presenting those findings to the Forest Economy Committee, with the hopes that prior to the symposium, the committee is going to be able to think a little bit about like the so what, is there anything that based on the report findings, they want to take to the board, as a proposal, especially if there's going to be like a budget, any sort of budget need tied to that. And Ellen, do you want to share anything more about the completion of the needs assessment or your hopes for?
No, I think it's a useful conversation to have, to just brief you all on the findings from it. There's nothing surprising in it, but I think there's a relevant conversation that's going to be happening most likely over the summer, that assuming that S327, which is an economic development bill, passes, there is a part of that bill that instructs the Department of Economic Development to basically develop a report that looks at the amount of technical and business assistance that's available at different stages of development across the state, and different capital that's provided, and looking for gaps. So this is nothing new. And yesterday, Christine and I met with Commissioner Lyle Jepson and with Deputy Commissioner Nick Grimley and gave them a copy of the report as well as the graphic that we developed, as well as all the farm to plate related graphics related to technical assistance providers, to basically say, please don't think we're starting from scratch. We're not reinventing the wheel here. So I think there's a relevance in that to having this conversation, because the legislature, the Economic Development Committee and the Commerce Committees are both interested in this notion of, is there enough technical and business assistance provision available? Are there enough, in essence, boots on the ground for businesses at different stages of development? And that's very much what this report frames out specifically for the forest product sector. So I think to the extent to which we need to think about, on a strategy level, what, if anything, could WLEB do to support more provision overall of boots on the ground? I think that's a generative question for us to play around with.
And I think that's also linked to the accessibility work we're doing. I think there's a lot of like interesting through lines right now, like around that question.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that given that we're going to have, again, less money to work with next year, and who knows whether we'll be successful with raising additional funding in fiscal 28, we may be stuck here for a couple of years. I do think, Elizabeth, that we need to have a real strategic conversation, given that we are now in a state of a lot of more resource constraints, both at the federal level as well as the state level, that we should be dialing in and being even more strategic with how best to deploy this $1 million. What is going to really move the needle the most in terms of investing for the future of both sectors? Because out of necessity, is it strategic to be putting more money towards boots on the ground business assistance because there's so many businesses that need to pivot and need to rethink their business strategy, or going into trade shows because we need to get out more? Is it more smaller grants because there's just strategically that's where we can make the dollars go farther? Like, I think there's these big questions that we should be teeing up for conversation, and not just making the assumption that we're just going to do what we've always done and have a 60-40 split and it's going to look this way because we only have $1 million.
So
we're in a different time right now.
Yeah. Ellen, that's actually a great sort of, I think you just very nicely summarized how I'm approaching the June symposium, more as a learning opportunity. I guess that's actually why right now I'm trying to sort of highlight the key conversations we need to have. So I think we have the state of forestry. We have the needs assessment from the forest industry. Like, who else? I mean, Ellen, let's start with you, since we need to have this conversation. Who else do we want to hear from? So we would kind of stack some presentations potentially at the front of the symposium. For example, we had a very interesting, there were quite a number of board members there, but last week there was a very interesting presentation from the work that the Food Hub collective has been doing. And they have they've advanced a lot in the way that they're looking at their numbers and looking to collaborate moving forward. But that's, I think, also a potential, that's another presentation that I think would be interesting for the full board to hear. So what are the other conversations? And I guess, Ellen, do you want to add to that? You unmuted.
So Sarah and Elizabeth Nance and Elizabeth Sipple and Liz Gleason and Trevor and Alicia were all present at this was called the Food Hub Funders Forum, and we had about 22, 24 unique funders across from equity to grants to state, federal, congressional delegation folks, the whole capital continuum present. Will Belanger was there from VCLF. And the purpose of it was to have the 6 food hubs who are part of this food hub collaborative to share out with funders where they're at, what level of additional investment they need as a group to advance, because they are really in the middle of the supply chain. So one of the things that they have identified as a need is that there's a lot of farms that they pick up from that don't have loading docks. And so there's physical demanding, there's a physicalness that is very demanding on these hubs to go out to the farthest reaches to many of the farms they pick up on, because there's not good pickup spots. Like there's not a loading dock, there's not an easy ability that's safe in some cases to be getting cases onto trucks in an easy way, especially different times of the year. So I think that again, this is sort of the strategic questions around, with smaller dollars, do we focus on the middle of the supply chain more? Or are there these strategic, like we could put together a little pot of funds for just for loading docks on farms in this next year, some small pot that people apply for that. Again, very strategic, targeted types of offerings. It's just sort of in the soup right now about what is going to be the best and highest use of what limited funds we have to work with.
So are there other, like keeping it, on this thread, are there other conversations? Like I think Ellen, you just highlighted a few, right? Like thinking about the food hubs and the on the farm infrastructure demands, like Liz, other folks that are working with people day in and day out, like are there other conversations that you all can flag for me now that we want to make sure we have before we're making any budget decisions, right? I think as Ellen was saying, like, we don't want to go in before we've had the conversations we need to have with a budget proposal. And you can drop them in the chat, or it would be great if you share them out.
I think it could be interesting to try to get, I think the report from Christine will likely set up the forest needs assessment well, and we obviously have so much data from the Forest Futures Roadmap and from Farm to Plate, where people have kind of elevated high needs. So if there's a way to kind of cultivate certain things that we want to make sure people have read before, so we're not recreating work that other people have done going into those symposiums. And then I think just reacting in the moment, but maybe getting a couple people who have been in these sectors for a really long time, like Vern Grubinger and folks like that, to come and share, like, based on your very long tenure in this space and having seen changes in the market and businesses, like what are you seeing as some of the highest needs? I agree with Ellen and have been wondering kind of the same thing about what's the most effective way to use more limited funds. And historically, I've always been a really big proponent of like keeping working lands as similar as possible year to year, because it's like the only award that doesn't change a lot. Like it's not subject to the whims of like a new board at every turn. And like this is a different time, and I think we should have a strategic plan for a smaller pot of funding. And I'm not sure that I'm like totally on board with selecting one lane or one type of grant yet, but I have been thinking about it a lot. That's all I've got right now.
Does anybody else have, and these can be nascent thoughts, like they don't have to be fully worked out, but things that, as we're getting closer to this budgeting phase of our annual cycle, I guess I invite people to just email me as well. If there are questions, conversations that you are thinking about, and you want the board to be thinking about, if you can, be sure to share those with me, let's say in the next 2 weeks, would be helpful, because I'm now really shifting into thinking about the symposiums, and what those agendas will look like and what we want to talk about and achieve, both in June and in August. And I think, and this is going to be a big part of our conversation and the second part of our meeting today, but we're also going to have the final report from In Common. And right now, the process on implementation is that we will identify a handful of recommendations that we want to focus on executing in fiscal year 27. So of the recommendations from In Common, we know we can't, roll them all out in 1 year. But we're going to be working with the board to choose those that we want to focus on in FY27. And so that's also going to be the actual implementation of this work is also going to be a conversation that we will start in May, but will likely be finalized at the June symposium as well.
It sounds like a really rich agenda already.
Yeah, I know. Almost like, but I do like to, I want people to be able to weigh in, and then we'll see how we can also use the two, it's June and August. So I like to think about it holistically. Alan, I saw you unmuted. Do you want to?
Oh, no, I've been unmuted the whole time.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Great. Okay. So I think, that invitation, is to every one of you to share your thoughts again on the conversations you feel like the board should be having, prior to making, budget decisions for fiscal year 27. Thank you, Liz and Ellen, for kicking this off in a strong direction. I think the other updates for the board, I think one update, which is that the PK pellet grant, which has been alive, it's been on hold for many years. For those of you that remember, the process that we've been through, this is a brand new facility that's going to be producing pellets in Vermont, but they, now have their full funding stack and have actually purchased the equipment, which is what the Working Lands funds were going to be used for. So that grant is finally, that project is, yeah, it's really like gaining momentum, which is exciting. I think Abby shared with me that, there was actually there was a lot of interest this year within the legislature to look at funds that have been sitting too long. So, that's a fund that had been obligated to that business for a number of years. And so, that raises questions. So it's an even more important reason that they have finally been able to, the big holdup for them was raising the funds. Our $250,000 grant, the whole project is like a $5 million project. I don't know the final number, but it was, it sort of grew in size, and they did not have their funding stack built up until February, I think, is when they basically were able to basically to sign on 2 different loans. Yeah, Alex and then David. So that's a big update on a very delayed grant. Alex and then David, or David and then I guess Alex. I see your hand.
I just want to clarify, this is the project in Wells River, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
And it's the project line, it's Lime Green Heat. It's like a spin-off company. Mhm.
And how long has this grant now been, I'm just gonna say, languishing on the sidelines? It's going on at least 3 years, correct?
Yeah, 4 years.
So I think that should be that could be a topic, a short topic of conversation is future grants, especially given the fact that we are constrained financially, that they do not, that there is sort of a more narrow window rather than this open-endedness where this money could have been used 3 times over in prior years. Even though this is a great project, I just think that these things need to be shovel ready, or closer to shovel ready than this one apparently was.
I agree.
Alex.
We've had a few like that, and it's often that we meet with the coordinating committee to discuss those that are delayed. It's not an easy conversation either, because most times they're midst of the project itself, and it's hard to pull the rug out from underneath them. So it's nice to see that this is finally moving forward. Alex?
No, sorry, I don't have anything to say.
Nothing to say. Okay, Allison?
Just as somebody who worked on a project that took like 6 or 7 years, and involved millions of dollars, sometimes those things happen. And it could be that, to pull that funding out at the last minute could be disastrous. So while I understand the frustration of keeping that money out there for 4 years, sometimes it just takes much longer to do an ambitious project.
Yeah, and I think to add to that, one of the reasons, like, they shared with us very adamantly how helpful it was to have the investment from the state in leveraging outside funding. And I think that was part of the appetite for the coordinating committee to not pull those funds, is that we didn't want, pulling our 250,000 to make it seem like the state was, no longer believed in the project.
Just thinking about the first part of this conversation around priorities going forward for the next fiscal year, and how this is kind of indicative of how we may want to think about risk in grant making in the next round. If there are less funds, does that change our relationship to maybe funding projects that are less shovel ready or feel a little bit more ambitious? I could see that being a big aspect of the conversation around budgeting priorities.
That's a great point. Elizabeth, are you okay with us switching gears to stay on time and going into the new permanent position?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent. So at this time, if you, we will likely shut off the recording, which we're going to need Elizabeth for. Can you shut off recording if someone else did it, Trevor? I don't know if we can.
I don't
I
think,
might be able to.
Yes, I can. Okay.
You
So
can?
the
Okay.
reason I ask is with the new permanent position, I believe we're going to be talking about personnel. So I would be looking for a motion to go into executive session if you so please to have that discussion.
So moved.
Thank you,
Seconded.
Alex. Do we have a second?
Elizabeth, yes.
Second.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Okay. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Opposed, nay? All right, the motion carries, so I'm going to stop recording. Excellent. Thank you. So we're coming out of executive session at 10:28 a.m. And I would be looking for a motion to approve the permanent position out of the expenditure for the FY27 Working Lands Enterprise Initiative budget.
This is David. I
Allison
make that
Love.
motion.
Thank you, David. Second. Are there
Second.
any questions? Comments? All right, not seeing any. All those approved say yay.
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 All those against say nay. Can't see all your faces on here. Thank you. The motion carries. Now we're going to shift gears and invite our friends in from InCommon.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for being patient and sorry for going over on our agenda.
No problem.
It's very important, so I appreciate you waiting in there. So we have Aisha too. I don't see her on my screen. We both in there. I see Eric. Oh, perfect. There you go. Okay, excellent. Good. Good to see you both. So we are going to start off with InCommon and our recommendations. And we are in this discussion for the next hour and 45, hour and 50. Since we went over, if you need to take a break, please feel free to, shut off your video, go take a break and get your snacks and come right back. Otherwise, we're going to keep moving. So I'll turn it over to InCommon. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Allison. Good morning, everyone. Excited to be here today. And I am going to share a deck. Although, yeah, I think that we would like to go over very briefly the report that's more the insights, key findings, year one actions report, but very briefly, and spend the majority of the time on the recommended strategic actions report. And thank you all for your feedback thus far, and we really look forward to hearing more from you today. Share. Everybody see that? Yeah. Okay, terrific. Excellent. So yeah, just a couple of slides here, very quick overview of the insights report. We didn't have a lot of comments from board members on this, but happy to have you continue to look at it and give any feedback. We kind of broke this out into some sections. A lot of this was, kind of describing the process that we went through. So it's sort of a process and methodology report. It's going to link out to all the reports that we've done throughout this past year. And we still need to finalize like how we're putting this out to the public, or if we're more having the action report, recommendations report. But just really high level, explain sort of the board and staff engagement insights, that we worked on an equity definition, that we explored processes around understanding biases. We also shared sort of a variety of application process insights. So everything from, information that we learned from the surveys and interviews around, barriers, everything from language level and various requirements that were challenging for people, to additional resources and support that applicants said that they would like. So we sort of kind of highlighted a lot of that. And also, because we were part of the review process and decision-making process, we shared some of our insights there. And I think the bulk of those also sort of carried over into the action plan, and this is really around need and equity, sort of not being fully clear or understood, not necessarily uniformly considered. We also shared some outreach-focused insights, suggestions that directly came from businesses around ways or organizations, associations, everything from, have texting, mailers, going to more events, and partnering more with organizations. Already, the Working Land staff is already doing a lot of some of this, but there were suggestions for more. And then misunderstanding about working lands, that seemed to be a pretty common theme. So I think obviously in the actions report, we have a piece on just, communications around some of these misunderstandings. Like some people still thought there was a match. Some people still thought there was a full 100% reimbursement model. So even though the information is there and it says it, it's like people don't all know, or they're not all getting it. So it's like I think there's this need for some repetition and clear communications about some of these misunderstandings. And then reporting and feedback insights. Some people talked about maybe some alternative reporting formats. We also have that as a suggestion in the action report. And then, just in general, they want more feedback. And then finally, eligibility and competitiveness. I think there were some folks that wanted to expand the eligibility, but also there's this recognition that this is a highly competitive program. And so we sort of have some insights around eligibility and competitiveness there. So as we were making this insights, developing this report, sort of pulling in all the pieces from the past year that we've spent together, and we haven't actually shared this with agency Working Land staff yet, but we were really sort of starting to think about this arc and if I don't know if it's an exact theory of change, but we were sort of just trying to like visually map it. And then it was like, well, actually, maybe this is kind of a theory of change. So we just wanted to present this briefly before we go into the recommended actions report. So there's some context and considerations that this is a competitive program, and there's limited funding, and there is a 20% award rate, right? So that's just a basic kind of fact about the program. That there are some additional resources partners that are needed to make the program accessible and more equitable and accessible. And there is also a risk of increased competition without added capacity. So that doesn't necessarily mean more money, but you can't just sort of like do all these actions without putting effort into them, right? So that this does take effort. And if you also do that, you may be even increasing the number of people who are applying, right? We're trying to reduce barriers. So I think that's just another fact that it's important to consider. Like, we are trying to grow and make this program more accessible. And if that is the case, there is sort of this risk of even more competition, right? So those are just some key considerations. And then the equity strategic actions, that's sort of the highest level top line. summary of what we sort of had in the action report: reducing barriers, aligning processes with equity and need, supporting the applicant pool, and implementing some targeted equity-focused programming. And that can lead to, if implemented, can lead to, you know, more diverse and competitive applicants, consistent, transparent decisions, direction of resources where they're most needed, and more accessible and effective working lands program. And then in terms of the system's impacts, ultimately, that can also help reduce overall barriers to capital that businesses are facing, and ultimately lead to a more diverse and resilient working lands economy. So just wanted to share that before we move into the action plan, and love to pause if anyone has any thoughts on the first report or this draft theory of change. I'm seeing some perplexed faces. I don't know if that's something. But if you don't have any comments or thoughts now, that's fine too. I'm not sure if we're going to include this in anything. You know, it was really partly for Aisha and I to kind of make sense of sort of an arc, and think of it as a theory of change. But I'd love to hear others' thoughts. Donna.
Yeah, I'd seen quite a bit in the report on the feedback you got from different applicants, and I never saw how many of those farm and forest businesses actually responded to your ask. Like, what is this based on? Is it based on 10 businesses, 50, 100?
I think we had about, I would need to check the number. I think about 48 businesses responded to the survey. I think that was the number, but I need to double check that. And that was a report that we had shared, because it was a while now. I think it was late last fall or maybe January.
Yeah, it was 48. I just checked the report.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And then we also
Interviews.
10 interviews. And then we had the Equity Advisory Committee as well. So all of these, that's sort of, and then, you know, we did but we did the audit, and then we also did some background research from other states as well. So sort of all of that research is sort of pulled in. Any other thoughts at this point? Questions? Okay. Now we can move on to the strategic actions report, and appreciate everyone's comments in there so far. Okay, thanks, Liz, for that.
Yeah, I agree too. I think it makes sense. I just needed to sit with it for a little bit there. I mean, it does flow from one to the next. So from a theory of change perspective, I think it holds up.
Okay. Yeah, and I think it's something that if it feels helpful to have a diagram or a theory of change statement, and maybe that's something also that's worked into the equity language that we've worked on with you, you know, that sort of has like a definition, but then it goes into the considerations, and then it has some commitments there. So if we do turn that into a document, if you end up adopting something like that, you know, we could consider also having a theory of change be in there. Right. Yeah. Well, we can share this so you can have more opportunity to reflect on it. All right. I'm going to pass it over to Aisha to go through, start going through the equity action plan.
Thanks, Erica.
Yeah, so moving into the specific recommendations, which most of them flow directly from what was presented sort of as the key insights from that last report. The way that the following slides are going to be walked through is using a version of that sort of impact and implementation matrix that's in the report. But we have broken out the recommendations into each of their separate categories. So you'll see what I mean in just a moment when we go to the next slide. But for example, we'll start by looking at the board actions. And just a reminder in this slide of what that sort of matrix color coding scheme looks like currently. It may be adjusted, but for now it's the same as what's in the report. So you do have the high, medium, and low impact on one axis, and that refers to sort of the assumed amount of positive change that the action will accrue. I know there was some questions in the report about making that more clear and how that was decided, but generally it was through increasing equity components or inclusion at various levels of programming to improve access. And the implementation kind of timeline along the top is not exactly an ease of implementation timeline, but it does generally map to the concept that, easier actions that require less discussion or legal review or additional funding, et cetera, could be implemented, within this coming year, within the next 2 years, or may take 2 or more years to achieve. Sometimes that work will have to start now, though, so that will also be indicated. Items in bold are the ones that have been flagged as likely having a higher degree of difficulty for implementation, again, likely due to budgetary or legal considerations. And then the items in green with the color coding, and I hope that it comes through okay on people's screens, those are essentially the easiest to implement, ready to implement, and high priority. Items in yellow that have a little yellow background require some further consideration or details to be put in place. Items in blue are those that we felt require significant review and discussion by staff and board to determine the feasibility of it. Sometimes that's really just a matter of figuring out what amount of effort there is required. Sometimes there might be items that are not moved forward, and that's part of the process. So with that, throughout the whole presentation, feel free to chime in at any point or raise a hand or drop a note in the chat if there's questions. But hopefully it'll become clear as we discuss. So with the board actions, like I said, here's the matrix, and I'm just going to read through all of these, starting out with the short-term implementation timeline, the one on the left-hand side below, before the end of year grant cycle column, and then we can discuss them. So starting with the highest impact is to formalize and share the equity language. Medium impact there is to get equity-based community agreements for the working lands meetings. That might look like the development of norms, for example, to help keep attention on this work. And then low impact in that column right now is to adjust the roadmap priority 3 to align with learnings from the equity process. We then have in the before 2027 grant cycle column in the high impact to develop and facilitate an ongoing equity advisory committee, and that really builds on the success of the ad hoc committee we convened. And to also explore pathways for non-traditional or non-commercial producers. That's definitely a blue one. There's some notes about what that could look like, such as a re-granting option, but requires discussion. And in the 2+ years column, highest impact is to add equity-focused positions into the board composition. And within the medium range is to provide board compensation based on need and to create a separate fund with a simpler application. So please chime in with anything that you want to discuss. I know Eric and I are happy to also go deeper into some that we like the blue or yellow that requires some more, but we're happy to explain more or have a discussion on whatever stands out first.
Looks good. Thank you, Aisha. And we should probably, for staff, we should probably cost this out then as part of our other conversation about the totality of what it costs to run this program, so that we can add that into the mix of future funding needs.
Yeah, I am curious what there were sort of two directions we were going with that the research really and this process really showed that potentially kind of a separate pathway could be helpful. The advisory board was kind of split in how they felt about a completely separate fund. There were some that really thought this would be really helpful, could be like a lower lift. Of course, there is a strategy later that says, doing sort of the two-tiered application process, which would be that sort of lower lift to initially apply. So that's another avenue. But yeah, some felt like, okay, you're sort of putting that equity on the side and kind of isolating it versus integrating it. And then we have the recommendation to consider around using the the service provider and association grants to sort of pilot a re-granting program through that for organizations that, really want to work with these populations and can do some of these smaller, like more nimble type of grants and don't necessarily have, all of the some of the restrictions that can that can come through when an agency implements a grant, whether that's technical like web grants or whether that's some other factors. I didn't know if anyone has thoughts on that. It feels like there will need to be a lot of discussion before moving one of those forward. So and you have time, over the, months, and at your June meeting, to discuss more. But, yeah, love any feedback if anyone has any specifics on that.
I will just tack on, but please chime in. If there are recommendations that don't feel appropriate at the time or feel like they're taking too long, part of this is that it is really an ongoing process. So it might be a matter of piloting one direction to start, seeing the success of that. And then if there is, an interest, you can always try a different way. So in the final report, we expect that we'll leave in the majority of these recommendations. Very few will actually be cut from it at this point. But we will kind of add that context too, that sometimes these are the two different pathways that can be taken to address the same issue. And that's just a matter of decision making and what feels feasible at the given moment.
I think Liz Gleason has her hand up.
Oh, sorry, I missed it.
Oh, no problem. I am so deeply curious about this re-granting idea, but I also feel like that's like a whole thing in and of itself. That would be a really big change from how we've managed this award historically, and might sort of take away from some of the like kind of cohesive, like, hey, we have this cohesive program. Isn't it cool? And look at everything we can do with it. And I really want to emphasize that there are a lot of organizations in Vermont that have very close ties with businesses and organizations working the land that have a lot of capacity and or have the potential to have a lot of capacity and skill in re-granting. And I'm saying that specifically because I was just reading that section and noticed the comments around, like, are there organizations that could do that? And I just want to very firmly say that there are, and there are organizations already running their own grant programs that achieve similar outcomes. I'm thinking of NOFA's Family Farmer of the Month program as an example. So I am kind of curious about that idea, and I want to sit with it a little bit longer and read more of the comments around that. And then the other thing is I just wanted to notice on this timeline piece is that I am wondering if it's possible to bump up that board compensation and board position. Like, to me, that seems like maybe, well, I'd love to know what other people think on that timeline, because to me that seemed like one of the things that could be tackled more quickly, but I could be missing something.
So for the equity positions on the board, I don't think that that's necessarily, I mean, it does require some statutory change, and that's why we put it in the 2+ year. We also put it in the high impact, but we put it in the 2+ year because we figured, I mean, if you advocated it for, I mean, this session's over, so it would have to be next spring, and then, I mean, potentially it could be before the 2027 grant cycle, but that is a small window between when the legislature ends and when the fall grants open. So, I mean, it's the summer, but it's possible. Is that what you're saying, Liz, putting that a little earlier in the cycle?
Yeah, that seemed like maybe that could be a goal for before 2027, but I certainly wasn't like mapping the legislative timeline in my brain while saying that comment. So it could just be totally wrong.
Yeah.
But I think either way, it should be paired with the board compensation piece, which I think is really worth a conversation no matter what, because there's a lot of people on this board that take a lot of their time and may not have that really well covered by work.
Yeah, I mean, and that is great to hear. And we separated them because we didn't want it to have to rely on the compensation. And the compensation piece was uh, a little trickier because it's not just a statute for working lands, it's actually there's a statewide policy around what any board, any committee or board that state can currently receive. It does sound like there's some flexibility within that. If people's, but I think that's very conditional, and I'm not exactly sure how that works. So I think that if the working lands board really, enterprise board really felt like moving in that direction, and that should be coupled, we shouldn't be adding equity positions without addressing this issue of compensation. Then maybe we can either combine them or reference them, but we purposely kept those separate. Because we didn't really want that stickier compensation piece that's more of a statewide policy to kind of hold up these equity positions.
Totally, yeah, I didn't mean do one without the other, even though that's literally what I said. But just didn't, I think it's powerful and it's worth trying to do both, but I agree that there are different considerations for those two things.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Any other thoughts on these board actions? Well, you can continue to make comments in the document as well. We will be meeting, well, this is part of our next steps at the end, but we will be meeting with the IDEA committee and, continuing to kind of work on finalizing these reports. And then the report will be, we will design it, and it will be sort of a PDF eventually, but there still is a lot of opportunity to weigh in. Okay, moving to application processes.
Yeah, so going through the same structure of reading through them from the before end of year grant cycle and high impact down to low impact and 2 years out, which the majority are in the shorter term for this one. The first is to continue flexible payment structures, e.g. the upfront payments, and maintain the removal of match requirements. This one is a key recommendation that came about only somewhat recently when we realized that this was a potential for not being continued on. So definitely a high impact and want to advocate for the maintaining of these two aspects, which have been so pivotal to the grant already becoming much more equitable and accessible. One thing that we learned recently as a part of this is how much more competitive the grant applications have become in the past couple of years. And so we do think that this was a key aspect of why that's been happening and necessary to continue. In the medium impact is to simplify and clarify language in the RFA application materials. this is definitely an ongoing process. It can be started soon, but it was something that would likely be, every year kind of a touch point. And then addressing the permitting challenges and providing support. That definitely is a bolded one because there's obviously interagency considerations. For the 2027 grant cycle for high impact is to provide examples of applications, documents, and reports. So something that was frequently requested by businesses across the sectors and spectrums. And then in the medium impact to reduce technical risks in web grants as possible. And then finally, high impact and further out is to introduce a two-stage or tiered application process, which Eric referred to earlier, but this would really be a full transformation of how the entire application process is done, using something more like a letter of interest model. So requires significant discussion and planning, certainly.
And some comments in the document, which we also had discussed, was, how do you get enough information, sort of a simple initial application to make good decisions about what to move forward? So that's kind of always the challenge with the simple LOI model or some kind of simplified application is, and especially when it comes to need and equity, that would somehow have to be part of that process. So I think that's a very big consideration. But it does sound like, Alex, you had a comment that you thought that was a really great idea. I think Elizabeth also, Nance also had that comment.
Let's go for it.
Yeah, this is sort of a technical thing, but I like in the providing examples of applications and documents, like on the board, I would like one of those, like in a Word document format. I know we're bound by web grants, but the sliding panels next to each other with lots of little holes and to fill things out is not very holistic, and so it's really challenging to like actually understand the resume that I'm looking at.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion from the the back end side as well, for sure.
Can I just call out so the board understands, because I know that we all don't track the legislature. But the high impact of continuing flexible payment structures and the removal of the match requirements. I know the legislature has raised questions about no match requirement, and they also have discussed changing statute to require match requirements this year in some of their testimony.
Yeah, thank you for pointing that out, Allison. And that was a very strong aspect of the research that people said they could never have applied without that, without either both match or having the ability to have some upfront payments. Some said they would like even a higher percentage for upfront payments. And it's, I think, yeah, it was a wide variety of businesses. And even nonprofit, even some of the TA and service provider applicants said that as well. And there was, and when there was a misunderstanding about it, people were like saying, "Oh, the match is so," and they thought that there was still the match, and it was like, this is impossible for us. And it was like, no, actually, there isn't a match.
Yeah, I think it is truly, a strong equity point, because there's so many that are capable of good ideas and startup with businesses, but without that structure, they just can't do it. Their dreams don't come true. And we've seen some businesses really grow up through the process, which is interesting. I mean, the program only being a decade old and seeing how some of those businesses are doing today is pretty fun.
That's great. Liz?
Um, I'm curious, Allison, you just mentioned some conversation in the legislature about going back to requiring match. Is that something we need to understand where that's coming from, how powerful it might be? And I see it as really, really helpful, and also some challenges with having made that decision. Like from a like straight business financial viability perspective, I hear a lot of people say things like we should only be funding things that could also get a loan. Things like that, which I don't think and I see this board really strongly like having a slightly different take on the financial viability, and I think the match reduction was a really important part of that, and I am like really strongly in favor of keeping low to no match. But I am a little concerned to hear that in particular is getting attention. Like it just seems so programmatic and administrative, and like the legislature created this huge, like high-powered board to make decisions around this program, and I'm like, please, I want to understand that a little bit more. What are the risks that they're seeing to that? And if that was just like a little thing that I don't really need to worry about, feel free to tell me that we don't have time to talk about it or we should talk about it offline.
Yeah, no, I think it's important, and I had been approached from a member in the House. I'm not certain, I'm not certain if it was talked about at length in committee because I didn't hear the discussion, but I know that it was being discussed within the members about, because I was asked about it. So I had a good discussion with them and let them know, you know, what was there previously and what we do today, and just the differences of what it allows folks to leverage. And I think oftentimes we understand that businesses, especially those startups, can't access loans many times until they have 2 years of a profit and loss and balance sheet to show. So it was a good conversation, but I think it keeps it fresh in our mind that we shouldn't be shy about explaining why it's done the way that it's done. We get time in front of those committees when we go over and present. So, you know, maybe next year when we talk about the grantee recipients that are presenting, it's something that we keep in mind, maybe as a question to for them to consider when they do their presentation to the committees of jurisdiction.
I can just offer just additionally, I haven't seen the language included in any bill, but it has been discussed in committee and out of committee, you know, numerous times. I think the gist, as I understand, and the conversations that I've been a part of with the committee has been a desire to have businesses show a little investment, like, you know, like the old skin in the game kind of reference. And that I think they too are, as a legislative body and policymaking entity, thinking about how to make resources go further, farther, with greatest possible impact. And so they see the possibility of a required match as a way to kind of have the impacts of the working lands investment be best actualized. The comments that I'm aware that have been shared back with the committee have been around equity issues, have been around supporting small businesses, have reminded the committee that the program used to have a required match. And then we did this pilot experiment a few years ago during COVID without match to really see if it brought in a more diverse and made the resources more accessible. And I think the staff have done a nice job outlining how it feels that was a successful
pilot of no match. And I really appreciate your comment, Liz, of kind of that administrative decision really living at the board level as opposed to being mandated in statute. And I think there has been some testimony provided about that as well, that that's typically a board level decision as opposed to statute.
Thank you, Abby. Okay. Should we move on to the next section?
Yes, sorry, I was reading Liz's comment in the chat. Okay, going into the review and decision-making processes recommendations. A lot of these are fairly simple to implement. There are none that we noted as having high legal or budgeting burdens with them. So from the top, there's improving the equity scoring and review processes. That is a pretty detailed list of recommendations. It has its own document that goes into it, so we can definitely discuss that and offer some more clarification as needed. Also limiting multiple awards to the same entity. That came up through this last grant review cycle as something that was definitely a high priority to have on the table to discuss. And then restructuring the rubric to strengthen the need-based scoring criteria. This is really looking at clarifying and increasing the weight of financial need in the overall score. There's also ensuring WLEB members are regularly engaged in understanding systemic inequity, kind of keeping up with what we've already been doing over this past year in terms of things like the anti-bias training, just having a real focused role of attention to that. In the longer term, before 2027 grant cycle range, there's piloting a blind or anonymous review process. There's a lot of considerations as to how exactly that would look. Obviously, one of the big things is that Vermont is a small state and there's a lot of ways that people might still recognize applications. So it really is promoted as a pilot to run for a cycle or two and see what the outcomes are. And then in the 2+ years range is to allow competitive unfunded projects to roll over into the following year, which is a model that many other types of funds implement and was actually suggested directly from our advisory committee, I believe.
Alicia, you had mentioned in the report that you'd love to dive into the equity and need. That's a little separate document that we did with equity and need, and it was largely around scoring. Did you have any questions about that, or would you like us to, if anybody hasn't seen that, let's see, it is linked on page.
Erica, if I recall my comment, just as you peruse there, is just if there is more like abstract or qualitative measures of how these things are ranked, just be explicit in how they are achieved, right? And if it's like we are considering these an impact here numerically of how many folks are impacted or what the measure is, and it's okay if it's abstract, but just naming it as such.
Yeah, I appreciated that comment a lot. And while I don't think we have very clear quantitative impacts that we can share, I think there are some, I mean, it was definitely informed from the research. So I think even just having something in there that it's either, it also connects to the theory of change, but also, grounded in the research. And I think naming that and just being more clear about what we're talking about when we say impact, and just even like a very explicit definition of what we're saying, I think would be really helpful.
Exactly.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And here is, I will also share, just in case anybody hasn't seen it, in the chat, we'll share this, and this was linked in the report, but we have some varieties for scoring here for equity and need. I think our biggest recommendation on need is actually to, right now it's 10 points for sort of the business viability and 5 points for need. So we're saying basically increase the financial need, either make them even or even make the need a little bit more. So that, and then there's some examples there as well. And then we have some suggestions on equity as well. And this was a difficult one for us. I mean, we worked very closely with the Working Lands staff on this and the advisory board, and there are a lot of legal considerations for this one, as Alicia, you had pointed out in the document. You know, it'd be good to discuss that. The staff counsel at the Agency of Agriculture, legal counsel has been reviewing, but there certainly are issues with potentially asking about an owner's protected class. So that option 2 is a little bit more difficult. I wanted to point out that for option 1, one of the challenges there, and this was brought up by several equity advisory committee members, is that when you're asking people to explain their the hardships they've faced, it can be sort of re-traumatizing. So for best practices within trauma informed practices, they I would think they would typically not require someone to have to answer that. And so we sort of are left with, like, if we want to move into understanding the individual impacts on the business versus just the downstream equity impacts that's currently being considered with the current equity question, that we would need to really think through these options. So there's legal considerations, and then there's trauma-informed considerations as well. Any other comments on questions, comments, thoughts on review and decision-making processes? Oh, Liz, is your hand up?
I mean, I really feel like that's sort of the crux of it, or the most powerful thing that we still haven't tackled as a board, and really complex. I think I feel sort of proud of this board and this organization for having made some really critical decisions early on that made, and the last couple of years that have made this a more effective granting program, like no match, like the prepayments. Those are really powerful, and I just want to say thank you to the staff and the boards that came before us for having, figured all of that out. And there's obviously still a lot more to do. And I'm curious to hear more about how we move through this one around decision making and the scoring criteria and that challenge that you just brought up, Erica, of how this board, but also how a really, really large number of external reviewers that don't have the same training, haven't had these same conversations, like, yeah, how that decision making all trickles down between all those different groups. I think it's great that we're talking about this, and this is just like step 1 of what is a more complicated process.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this first part of this side document on equity and need, I think this equity piece will be really important to continue discussing. And does anyone have comments on the need side? We sort of presented a lot of different options there. We also are recommending some kind of asset cap. Almost every USDA grant program has one. So that is another thing we're recommending, and we have that in there, and you would not necessarily, you don't have to do a hard cap. You can make it more flexible. There's some options we put in there for you to consider.
You have some hands up, Erica.
Oh, gosh, I keep missing hands. Okay, let's see. I think it's because I have too many things on my screen.
It's okay. I'll help you. It's Tyler and then Eric. Alex, I just didn't want to interrupt you.
Yeah,
Go ahead,
thanks.
Tyler.
Thanks, Erica. Yeah, on the need, I was really appreciating that section, and I actually really appreciate the idea generation. I feel like it's right now it's like an incredibly difficult thing to assess as a reviewer, the way we have it. I think it will continue to be incredibly difficult. So I'm just looking forward to having a dedicated time to really think about how how we might try to apply that. And I'm just also thinking an earlier part of our meeting today, we are sort of talking a little bit about the massive competitiveness of this grant and what we're asking applicants to do. It's like my immediate reaction is it's actually quite difficult to prove the need in some of the ways. And so we're asking a lot of people who won't get funded to do extra work. I'm just kind of sitting with that. So some of the simpler, like the cap is interesting to me because it's simple. It inevitably would have some unintended consequences, but I do think we're going to need simplicity in that at some level, most likely, unless we're prepared to add, hours to each application's process. So just things I'm sitting with, but having a lot of options in examples is incredibly helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, you're very welcome. And I think that you sort of hit on a core paradox of, needing good information to make equity and need decisions, yet that puts more burden on the applicant. And it's kind of one of the core themes. And if we haven't highlighted that theme enough, we should. So thank you, Tyler. Alex.
Yeah, I just kind of building on that when I've been reviewing grants, and I have never done it anywhere else, so I only have this as my sample size. But and I was a high school teacher for a time, and I think a thing we're suffering from a little bit is sort of almost grade inflation. We're getting a lot of very high quality applicants because our scoring criteria are relatively big whack chunks of numbers as opposed to finer grained things. And this can cut both ways. Like if I have to fill out a lot of little things in a grant review, that maybe takes more time, but it also allows you to agonize less because you can just hit smaller numbers instead of all the points being bucketed here, they're spread across things, which allows you to fine tune a little bit, I think. So I don't, that would allow us to insert some other criteria in there, and also to potentially make it attuned more to need-based things as opposed to just sort of lumping need in with a bunch of other things where it can get watered down in terms of its impact on final scores, which would then hopefully allow us to have a spread of final scores that's a little more reflective of an average distribution of things, as opposed to oh, they're all 85 to 92s. How do we differentiate them?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, if right, and if need would become a bigger percentage of scoring, that may impact that range as well. Yeah. But I hear you on the broadening eligibility versus kind of the narrowing and sort of the interplay of that as well. Any other thoughts on this one? I think we have one more to go, Aisha, or two.
I do have one. I do have a thought to share.
Please.
And
And that is that I agree about strengthening the need-based scoring criteria. But after reviewing some applications where they really identified the need, and maybe where I kind of knew the business somewhat, I like sometimes it's pretty subjective when an applicant says there's need based on whether there really is financial need or if it's a matter of wanting to like retain more of their own cash or that sort of thing.
Right, right. One thing that we have in that side report is we've sort of pulled out the barriers to capital into the equity piece.
Mm-hmm.
And the financial review, I mean, obviously a reviewer will be looking at the numbers to see if there have been maybe some of those barriers to capital as well. But it does largely focus on yeah, sort of more of the technical or the dollar amount of looking at looking at the finances. Either, you know, seeing right. And it is hard. It's not going to be easy. I agree, Sarah. And I think it will need very, very clear instructions. Okay. Well, thank you for those comments. And again, please feel free to continue to add comments to the report. Questions?
I think you skipped over the communication slide, Erica.
I did.
Great. So as I said, there's two last buckets of sort of recommendation areas. This one is for outreach and communications, and largely these are improvements on a lot of the work that the staff has already been doing. So just building on that, continuing to tailor outreach to engage rural working lands communities, as well as immigrant and English as second language businesses. That's, you know, partly through the TA options, but also just being more visible in some of the events or spaces that those individuals and businesses would be present in or be looking for resources from. The also one that Erica talked about kind of with the other report, pretty detailed already, but communicate more clearly about the common misconceptions. It was just such a wide ranging issue that there are perceived barriers that have actually already been dealt with. So figuring out ways to make that more apparent to everyone. And then developing a year-round referral process to connect interested potential applicants with TA services outside of the RFA cycles. And this one specifically came about from the focus groups where one of the big issues that the TA and providers suggested that they notice is people come to, you know, the support, the TA support during the grant cycle, come to receive it, and they are not really prepared. They haven't put enough thought into what their project looks like, or they haven't just done enough preparation to pull together the application in a short time frame. So figuring out ways to kind of throughout the year continue that referral process and just make it a little more clearly stated, maybe that it's strongly beneficial to receive those services in advance of the grant cycle.
And we should also point out that one of the most common misconceptions is that there was no light touch, and I'm using quote because I know that that's not a term that's used, but some people just did not know about the VHCB option, even though it says it right in the application. So I think they're sort of like communicating about that program more. We did I forgot to mention that focus groups were another key part of the research. We did focus groups with TA service providers as well as associations, and in the focus group with the TA providers, of all, you know, it was primarily farm and forest viability providers in that, and they said that, you know, they do have capacity to support these applicants. So sometimes people were looking more for direct grant writing support, though, so it wasn't always maybe exactly, you know, they maybe weren't sure about what those services were. So I think just this is really largely just a communication issue. And then, you know, but I think that the service provider grants that you do can also be potentially an opportunity to invest in those organizations that are then supporting applicants in various ways. We talked with conservation districts, and many of them support applications, but in sort of a different process and way that maybe the farm and forest viability providers would. And I'm probably going to be, Aisha, I know you have to leave in a couple of minutes, but I'll be able to stay on for as long as needed. Does anyone have any thoughts or comments, questions about outreach and communications? Let's see. All right, and this is the final one. And this is just sort of a combination. It was sort of we didn't have a lot of recommendations, so we combined reporting and applicant feedback, even though they're quite different things. So we just had 2 recommendations here, and just overall, I think applicants want the research showed that they just want a little bit more feedback. I think the Working Land staff does already a very good job, and they've improved this over years. And I really should. I don't think we've said enough positive things about how incredible the Working Lands staff is in their commitment to everything with Working Lands, but especially with equity and accessibility. And they've done so many things with application processes all the way through. But, I think there were some just specific recommendations that we had for feedback. And we also have a strategy here on developing additional support and alternative models for awardee reporting. So we heard that some applicants found the reporting process a little difficult, and then some associations and service providers said that if we were to try to expand sort of the equity aspects of this program, bringing in additional folks that may currently maybe aren't as competitive, as an example, that we basically this would be, this could look different ways. It could be a video recording. I think that Dave, I think you're unmuted. Or you're unmuted. Anyway, so we have a couple of recommendations there. So those are just 2. They're very, I don't think they're, a big lift to, and actually we could maybe even put the strength and feedback for non-awardees a little earlier. We could probably put that in the before end of year grant cycle. And again, they've already been working on this quite a bit. We've talked about some ideas. Anything on these 2? I think the consideration on the alternative models for reporting would be, making sure that the agency gets enough and the board have enough information from those reports to then go back to the legislature to show impact. But it might be also neat to show some alternative formats of reporting and impact and videos. So. Okay, so I guess we're at next steps here.
Eric, I think Liz has her hand up.
Gosh, I keep missing those hands. Liz.
Totally okay. And it's not that important, but I just wanted to say we've started trying very occasionally to do like interviews instead of a written report if folks prefer that. And I think if it's structured well, it can actually be, you can get better information and better sort of answers to the impact questions through an interview.
That's really interesting. And of course, that would take some time, a little more time, consideration of a little more time from staff. But I love that idea. And I'm currently for another project, doing interviews from a grant a final, it was a pilot project and pilot projects that were funded. And that's exactly how we're doing the reporting. So I love that idea and hadn't thought of that. So we'll add that in. So thanks you all for your input today. And you can continue to sit with these reports, add any comments. We won't be finalizing this for a little while. We are meeting with the IDEA, sorry, I said ideas, but I meant little s there, IDEA reviewer meeting. We will also be meeting with them with a full IDEA committee in May. That's not until I think after your next board meeting. So, you know, we won't finalize the reports until after that, until after your next board meeting. So you have sort of this whole month to continue to look at any of these reports. And we will be then, you know, kind of discussing it would be, you know, we can work with Elizabeth and Claire on this, but you know, really figuring out what we want to talk about at that May meeting, and how an external facing report of our recommendations looks like, and how maybe you want to utilize that report to maybe develop your own yearly action plans around equity, because you know you can't like do all of these at once, right? And there's a lot here, and there's different pathways you can take. And then we will be designing a final report to deliver to you to use as a resource. And then we'll be available throughout the month of June for any questions. And Elizabeth, is there anything else you wanted to add on the next steps?
Nope, I think these are correct. Yeah, I think you've got it here.
Terrific. All right, well, thank you. And I think that's it, Allison, from us. So if no one has anything else on your side, can say goodbye, and you can open up your public comment and updates part a little early.
Excellent. Thank you, Erica and Aisha. We appreciate all that you've given us. More work to do.
Yeah.
But it's been a great process. So thank you so much. And hope we got you off on time to your next commitment.
Yeah, no problem at all. Okay, have a great day, everyone. Take care.
You too. Take care. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Erica. Thank you, Alicia.
All right, so we might get out of here on time. Imagine that. So we are gonna move over to announcements. There is no public comment that I'm aware of. Are there any announcements, Elizabeth?
I think we skipped the like agency update. So if Oliver's not here today, but if Elizabeth Nance or if we want to share anything of legislative updates, we could do that now.
The only legislative update that I have that's different than what we gave last month, because I think we talked about what had passed last month. Last May, there was a Supreme Court decision that allowed municipalities to regulate farming. And we are currently working with the legislature on language that would restore prior to the Supreme Court's decision where municipalities shall not regulate agriculture. There's some small carve-outs in there, but overall, you know, good things come out of compromise. We're pretty happy with where we currently are and feel that it'll be favorable to agriculture when it crosses a line. So that's exciting. Also, I see there's some folks in here that are true to equine. There's also some equine current use language that is being discussed in Senate Ag. Equine is not eligible for current use in most cases. So that could be a change coming. And then also, I mentioned last time, we're still waiting to sign off on a $31 million block grant for the 23-24 floods, market loss, infrastructure loss, etc. That's federal. So still working on that. And then we had a CAFO stakeholder meeting group that came out of last year's legislative session. CAFO stands for Confined Animal Feeding Operation. Which is usually thought of as the large or medium farms, though it does apply to small too. And it's around water quality. So those that are discharging would be regulated from Agency of Natural Resources. So the stakeholder group wrapped up last month. They have a report that will be going to the legislature in the next couple weeks. And it's my understanding that the stakeholder group will continue in statute to meet while our two water quality programs work together to start up the new CAFO program at the Agency of Natural Resources. So that's positive news as well. I think that's it. We had a rodenticide bill that was introduced to ban rodenticides. That did not make crossover. Paraquat was introduced to ban paraquat, but it's currently in Senate Ag, and it looks like we'll be issuing permits. There's not a lot of users for paraquat, and we at the agency certainly can make sure that folks have the proper training and enter their permits into the system so they can continue to use it. There was another bill that would have got rid of the overtime exemption and minimum wage exemption, and that did not make crossover either. That was OT and minimum wage exemptions for agriculture. So those are dead bills as far as I know. Happy to take any questions. Abby, Trevor, would you like to offer any more?
I think you got updates, Allison.
Okay. Let's see, Elizabeth Nance. You wish to give an update? Elizabeth still on with us? Nope. All right. Guess you don't get an update from FBR or ACCD. Not. There any other questions, things going through the legislature that folks are curious about? Alex?
What's the bill number about regulating or not regulating agriculture?
So there's two different bills. I knew we'd put me on the spot. I almost looked at them
I can
earlier.
find it too.
Yeah, they're in there was one in House Ag, and then there's also one in Senate Ag. It was the Senate Ag miscellaneous bill, which I think is 323.
S323 is that one. Yep.
See, I did remember that. And then H, why am I thinking it's 941?
It is. Yep.
Wow, okay. Yeah. See, our attorney handles most of the like bill number stuff. I used to know those things like the back of my mind, but not so much on the fly anymore. So I think what's going to happen is, if I understood correctly, Chair Durfee is going to put the amend, or excuse me, H is over in Senate. So I think they're going to amend in Senate Ag the H bill 941 with the language that all have agreed to. And then send it back over to the House to concur with the further proposal of amendment or appoint a committee of conference. So that's actually like on a pretty fast track, if I understand correctly. So it should pass because there's nothing else on that bill except for that topic. The S323 bill is loaded with an awful lot, so we're trying to keep it off that bill because we want to make sure it does pass. So super excited that, you know, industry and the League of Cities and Towns has been involved in many conversations outside of the session, you know, all summer long last year. And then, as you can imagine, it's difficult because there's carve outs that people want, and it's been a good dialogue. And we're appreciative of those farm groups that have come forward to work with the agency. So it's good news for agriculture. I actually just saw there was a ordinance in a local town here to regulate chickens, And there's some folks not happy about it, and this bill would not allow them to say that chickens cannot be on your land to lay eggs, so it'll be interesting. Any other questions? Excellent. So if there's no other announcements, questions, updates, then I'll take a motion to adjourn.
I propose we adjourn at 11:42 today.
Thank you, Alicia. Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
Excellent, Allison. Thank you. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carries. And again, thank you for your thoughtful discussion today. Appreciate all. So have a good one, and we'll see you at next month's meeting. Take care.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, all.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.